On the night of October 18th, 2024, 10 million people went to sleep in the dark. Not because of a storm. Cuba's national power grid collapsed completely, and it stayed collapsed for days. Hospitals switched to backup generators. When those failed, nurses stood over ventilator patients and squeezed air in by hand. This is the same country that trains more doctors per capita than Germany, that sends physicians to 67 nations across the globe. Cuba's literacy rate is 99.7%. Its infant mortality rate is lower than the United States, and its people cannot afford a kilogram of chicken. Both of these things are true at the same time. Neither cancels the other out. This is real life in Cuba. Cuba is shaped like a crocodile. Cubans call their island El Cocodrilo, stretched 1,250 kilometers from end to end, its spine running east-west, its tail toward Mexico, its jaws open toward Haiti. The largest island in the Caribbean, and the closest Caribbean island to the United States. Stand at the Malecon seawall in Havana on a clear day. The Florida Strait is in front of you. On the other side, 145 kilometers from where you are standing, is Key West, Florida. 90 miles, a number every Cuban knows by heart. Close enough to receive American radio. Close enough to see the idea of another life on a pirated Wi-Fi signal. Far enough that a government can seal the border and call it ideology. The Sierra Maestra Mountains in Cuba's southeast shaped more than the landscape. In December 1956, 82 rebels climbed those mountains after landing from a yacht called the Granma. Their numbers cut by more than half in the first days. The mountains swallowed what remained. Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Raul Castro survived because the Sierra Maestra is impenetrable if you know it. No mountains, no revolution. The land became the national creation myth. Cuba has 2 seasons. Dry months, November through April. Wet months, May through October. Inside those wet months, hurricane season. A word you will find out before this documentary ends that Cuba gave to the world long before any of this began. So before we go further, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments. We genuinely want to see how far this story has reached.
The blame divide. Generations, sanctions, and the state. The most contested question about Cuba, the one that has split families across 60 years, is this: who is responsible for the suffering? The United States has maintained an economic embargo on Cuba since February 1962. 62 years. The longest-running economic blockade in modern history. It prohibits American companies from trading with Cuba, cuts Cuba from the international banking system, and blocks the purchase of medicines from suppliers with American ties. The UN General Assembly condemned it in November 2023. 187 nations against, 2 in favor. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International document a second layer simultaneously: arbitrary detention of journalists, suppression of Cuba's July 2021 protests, the largest demonstrations in 60 years, with sentences of up to 25 years for protesters as young as 16, documented with physical evidence. The truth about Cuba's suffering is not simple, and anyone who tells you it is selling you something. The older generation, those who received free education and healthcare, who remember pre-revolution inequality, often locate responsibility with the embargo. El bloqueo mata. The blockade kills. The banking restrictions create genuine pharmaceutical shortages. The generation under 40, with VPN bypassed internet, compares Cuba to Vietnam and China, not in equivalent collapse. The state's refusal to allow meaningful private foreign investment, its prosecution of business owners who grow too successful. Internal choices, not embargo effects. Arturo Lopez Levy, writing in Foreign Affairs in 2023,
argues the crisis cannot be attributed to a single cause, without misreading both the embargo's reach and the government's own failures. After the October 2024 grid collapse, Cuban electrical engineers organized informal communication networks, bypassing official utility channels to share technical solutions in real time.
72 hours, engineers identified the critical failure points and submitted a repair protocol the state officially adopted. The state took credit. The engineers knew where the solution came from.
On any given morning in central Havana, a group of men will be gathered around a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air with the hood open. Not for tourists, solving a problem. One fitting a diesel marine engine from a fishing boat into an American car frame. Another fabricating a brake component from rebar. A third consulting a hand-drawn schematic because the original manual disintegrated 40 years ago. By noon, the car runs. Then something else breaks, and they fix that too. This scene repeats, in variation, approximately 60,000 times across Cuba every single day. The cultural concept at the center of this is one Spanish verb, resolver. To resolve, to fix it. In Cuban usage, survival by improvisation, finding the solution that does not officially exist by bending the system that created the problem. The Gallup World Poll 2023 found Cuba ranking anomalously high on positive daily emotional experiences relative to its economic conditions. Cubans consistently reported higher rates of laughter and social connection than their material circumstances would predict. Nos las arreglamos, we will figure it out, is spoken as certainty, not hope. Inventar, to invent, means in Cuban slang to hustle, to improvise, to make something work that by rights should not. Yoani Sanchez, Cuban journalist and founder of the independent 14 Medio, has documented this culture from the inside for nearly 2 decades. She describes it not as resilience in the Western inspirational sense, but as a necessary adaptation to a system that produces scarcity on a schedule. Resolver came from this special period. In the 1990s, when Soviet subsidies vanished overnight, Cuba lost 34% of its caloric intake. Blackouts ran 16 hours a day. Buses stopped. The people who survived did so through lateral thinking so radical it became cultural identity. That generation taught the next. This is who Cubans are now, not born optimists. People for whom optimism became the only practical strategy left. Here is how the system functions for an ordinary Cuban on median income in 2024. A teacher in Havana earns approximately 4,000 Cuban pesos per month. At market exchange rate, $16. 1 liter of cooking oil, 500 pesos. A kilogram of chicken, 1,500. A bag of flour, 400. Her entire monthly salary covers less than 3 weeks of basic necessities. She survives through remittances from a cousin in Miami, or she doesn't. Cuba's Libreta de Abastecimiento, the ration book, has existed since 1962. Every Cuban family receives monthly state allocations at subsidized prices: 5 eggs, 500 grams of rice, 250 grams of beans per person per month. In theory. In practice, 2024, allocations arrive late, incomplete, or not at all. Cubans call the phantom rations la normita que no llega, the norm that doesn't come. According to the UNDP Human Development Report 2023 and 2024, Cuba ranks 83rd out of 191 countries on the Human Development Index, high human development. The education system genuinely works. The healthcare system, when resourced, genuinely works.
What does not work is the economic infrastructure connecting them to daily life. Press Freedom Index, 168 of 180 countries, according to Reporters Without Borders in 2024. The same government that built the best medical school in the Caribbean imprisons journalists for documenting what is happening inside it. Now consider your hands. The last cigar you purchased in a duty-free shop in Cancun, in Madrid, in London was almost certainly Cuban tobacco. Cohiba, Monte Cristo, H. Upmann, Partagas, all products of Habanos S.A., the Cuban state tobacco monopoly, with annual global sales approaching $650 million.
Every dollar flows through the state. The tobacco farmer in Viñales who grew that leaf earns $25 to $35 per month. The premium you paid for handmade Cuban quality is not going to the hands that made it.
You know Cuba for the revolution, for the embargo, for the vintage cars and the cigars and the salsa. Here is what most people do not know. Cuba operates the largest state medical export program in human history. As of 2023, according to Reuters' analysis of Cuban government figures, approximately 30,000 Cuban medical professionals were deployed across 67 countries, from Venezuela and Brazil to Angola, East Timor, and Pakistan. Doctors, nurses, surgeons dispatched under bilateral contracts, with a significant portion of their salaries flowing directly back to Havana.
Cuba's medical missions generated approximately $6.3 billion in 2022 alone, making medical services Cuba's single largest export, exceeding tourism, sugar, and cigars combined. In 2018, at peak capacity, $11.5 billion, equivalent to approximately 67% of Cuba's entire GDP, according to Reuters calculations. A country of 11 million people on a collapsing power grid, where a teacher earns $16 a month, generating more foreign revenue from exporting physicians than most Caribbean nations earn from everything combined. The Latin American School of Medicine, ILAM, founded in Havana in 1999, has trained over 30,000 doctors from 110 countries, including hundreds of American students from communities underserved by the U.S. healthcare system. Cuba offered them free medical education as an ideological statement directed at Washington. Cuba built the largest physician export apparatus in the history of state medicine, and it used it simultaneously as humanitarian gift and state revenue stream. If you study how this program operates, the gift and the extraction become impossible to separate. Most coverage stops at the gift. We don't. Cuba has built two parallel infrastructures the state did not plan. The first is the Almendrone network. 60,000 American automobiles from before 1959, Chevrolets, Fords, Buicks, Plymouths, operate daily as collective taxis, private vehicles, emergency transport. Not nostalgia, necessity. The state makes it nearly impossible for an ordinary citizen to purchase a new car without a permit valued at over $50,000 in state currency, roughly 80 years of savings on a median salary. So Cubans became engineers. Diesel boat engines dropped into a 1952 Chevrolet frames. Russian Lada transmissions fitted into 1956 Ford bodies. Brake systems fabricated from plumbing pipe. The National Transportation Authority of Cuba estimates these vehicles carry approximately 3 million passenger trips per day. This is not a museum. This is infrastructure. The second is El Paquete Semanal, the weekly package. In a country where the state controls all media, Cubans invented a parallel internet. Every week, an anonymous network assembles approximately 1 terabyte of digital content. Films, television series, news, apps, music. That content loads onto USB drives. The drives pass from person to person across the island. El Paquete has no central office, no server, no structure anyone admits to. A network of trust operating outside state control, inside a state that controls everything. What this costs? Every hour maintaining a 1956 engine is an hour not building something new. Cuba has some of the most mechanically skilled people in the hemisphere, forced to use that skill only to sustain what was. It is 6:30 in the morning in Centro Habana. The neighborhood around Calle Neptuno, 3 blocks from the Malecón, is already awake. Electricity has been running since 4 a.m. on the rotating blackout schedule, and you learn to use it when you have it. A woman in her mid-30s has been up for an hour, queuing at the state bodega if the rice arrived. If it did not, she negotiates with a private seller at triple the price. 3 foods anchor her table. Ropa vieja, shredded beef in sofrito tomato sauce with peppers, onions, garlic, and cumin, served with rice and black beans, Cuba's national dish. Pilon, mashed cooked plantain, either sweet or salty. The name means old clothes, the texture of torn meat resembling torn fabric. At a state cafeteria, under $1. At a Cuban restaurant in Miami, $18 to $24. Tostones, plantains sliced thick, smashed flat, fried twice until golden and crisp. 10 US cents at street vendors, $7 to $9 in New York City. Plantain is to Cuba what potato is to Ireland, the caloric fallback when everything else disappears. Café cubano, dark roasted espresso brewed with sugar added to the grounds. A thick, intensely sweet shot topped with espuma, that caramelized foam. 3 US cents at a state cafeteria. A cortadito at a Miami window, $2.50 to $4. The national pause button. Grief shared over it. Arguments ended with it. An entire culture built around a 3-cent shot of coffee. One thing that would genuinely surprise you: the Escuela Nacional de Arte, built in 1961 on the former Havana Country Club grounds, offers full government scholarship music training from age 8. Cuban classical musicians perform in Vienna and Berlin. The state that cannot keep its lights on raised the musicians playing in the dark. You arrive in the Valle de Viñales at 7 in the morning, before the tour buses. The air is 15 degrees cooler than Havana. You are standing on deep, ferritic red soil that does not exist like this anywhere else on Earth. On your left, a mogote rises. Limestone, 400 million years old, 300 meters straight from the valley floor. No slope warning. It simply begins. A vertical wall standing alone in flat farmland. A farmer crosses the field with an ox. Not for tourists, because diesel costs more than an ox, and the ox works. The silence is complete enough to hear karst limestone dripping from the previous night's rain. The mogotes of Viñales are, according to the Cuban Geological Survey and UNESCO documentation, among the world's most dramatic examples of karst topography, formed over 160 million years as acidic rainwater dissolved surrounding limestone, leaving isolated columns of harder rock. Beneath them, cave systems containing underground rivers and Taino pictographs never professionally excavated. The tobacco grown here in the Vuelta Abajo microregion of Pinar del Rio is the only tobacco on Earth with the specific combination of red ferritic soil, humidity, and elevation that produces ligero, the heavy, slow-burning top leaf in the filler of every premium cohiba ever rolled. Ecuador, Honduras, Nicaragua cannot replicate this. The terroir of a cohiba is as geographically specific as a classified Burgundy. Viñales is where the soil that built Cuba's most valuable legal export has been worked by the same family hands for generations. The landscape that says, we were here before the revolution, before the embargo, before the republic. We will be here after. The rhythmic heartbeat of virtually every Latin dance floor on Earth, from Tokyo to Medellin, from Sao Paulo to Madrid, traces to a single 2-3 pattern, the clave, a rhythmic structure originating in the Afro-Cuban communities of Santiago de Cuba and Guantanamo in the late 19th century.
carried in the memory of enslaved people who preserved West African Yoruba and Bantu drumming traditions inside Catholic saints' festivals to avoid suppression. Son cubano, the musical form built on that pattern, is the direct ancestor of salsa, mambo, and cha-cha-cha. It shaped early American jazz through Cuban musicians documented in New Orleans as early as 1900. The Buena Vista Social Club album, recorded in Havana in 1997, sold over 8 million copies worldwide, won a Grammy, and appears at rank 260 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums. Celia Cruz, born in Havana's Santos Suarez neighborhood in 1925, sold over 70 million records, received 23 Grammy nominations, and was classified by Billboard as the single most important artist in Latin music history. Every club, every dance school, every streaming playlist labeled Latin music plays music whose fundamental architecture was built in Cuba by communities Cuba enslaved and then incorporated into the national myth. The world moves to Cuban rhythms every weekend without knowing where they came from. The rhythmic foundation of virtually all popular Latin music traces directly to son cubano, developed in Cuba's Oriente province in the 1890s by Afro-Cuban communities encoding African musical memory inside Spanish song. Real Life Files, 2026. If this story's surprising you, tap the hype button below. Each hype only lasts a few seconds, but it helps this video reach more people. We'd be grateful. Old Havana is 2.14 square kilometers of Baroque Spanish colonial architecture along Havana Bay, the largest and most intact colonial city center in the Americas, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1982. Spain built it because of the bay, one of the deepest natural harbors in the Caribbean, large enough to anchor entire treasure fleets. Ships loaded with Peruvian silver and Mexican gold stopped here for 3 centuries. The Castillo de la Real Fuerza, completed in 1577, is the oldest surviving European fortification in the Americas. In 1967, historian Eusebio Leal Spiegel convinced Fidel Castro to fund restoration using the neighborhood's own tourism revenue, not the state budget. Leal spent 53 years directing that work. He died in 2020. The project continued without him. Here is the reversal. What looks like a preserved colonial museum is a living neighborhood of over 70,000 residents who cannot afford the coffee shops occupying their ground floors. A building where tourists pay $15 each for a mojito is also the building where a family of 4 lives on the 4th floor with a broken elevator and no water pressure. Simultaneously, the most photographed neighborhood in the Caribbean and one of the most housing-stressed in Latin America, according to Reuters' 2023 investigative series. Cuba's most beautiful neighborhood is where the contradiction is most visible from the outside and most invisible to the people arriving with cameras. Return to where this began. Cuba trained the world's doctors. Cuba cannot feed those doctors. It built the most educated workforce in the Caribbean. That workforce is leaving. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection data and Reuters analysis from January 2024, between 2022 and 2024, an estimated 500,000 to 700,000 Cubans emigrated through the U.S. parole program and the Nicaragua route. Cuba's population, estimated at 11.2 million in 2022, may have fallen below 10.5 million by the end of 2024. Among those who left, doctors, engineers. The people Cuba educated for free at state expense in the name of socialist humanism are leaving. The education system that produced them is also why they could navigate a US immigration application in English and pass licensing exams in countries that did not train them. Cuba taught the people who left it how to leave effectively. You could argue that is the purest test of an education system. Arturo Lopez Levy, writing in Foreign Affairs in 2023, frames this as the central irony of the Cuban project.
Cuba invested decades in human capital, the most significant asset a developing country can create, and the conditions it built drove that capital elsewhere. The revolution built the surgeon. The revolution cannot keep the lights on in his hospital. Both are true at the same time. If the education works, and it does, if the cultural export is among the most significant in Latin American history, what does it mean that the people Cuba educated are choosing to leave it? That is not a rhetorical question. Put your answer in the comments. We want to read what you think. The dominant image of Cuba in the Western imagination: communist dictatorship, vintage cars, poverty, salsa dancing. Here is what the data says alongside that image. Cuba's literacy rate, 99.7%, exceeds the United States, where the U.S. Department of Education's National Assessment of Adult Literacy places functional literacy at approximately 88%. Cuba's physician density, 8.4 doctors per 1,000 population, exceeds Germany's 4.5, France's 3.2, and the United Kingdom's 3.0, according to WHO Global Health Observatory data for 2023. Cuba's infant mortality rate, 0 per 1,000 live births, is lower than the United States' 5.6 per WHO and CDC figures for 2023. A one-party state with a lower infant mortality rate than the richest country on Earth. Both things are true at the same time. What the stereotype costs Cuba? Tourism, which before COVID generated over $3 billion annually, has not recovered to 2019 levels. The communist framing creates barriers for a country that needs foreign revenue. What is true in the stereotype, and what you should not look away from? Cuba is a one-party state. Journalists are imprisoned. The July 2021 protesters received sentences of up to 25 years. Human Rights Watch documents this with physical evidence. The Cuban government does not deny the sentences. It defends them. That belongs in this documentary alongside every other fact.
There is a word you use every summer without knowing Cuba gave it to you: hurricane. The event that batters Florida, Louisiana, and Texas from June through November. The word on your weather app when something serious is coming. On billions of dollars of insurance claims each year. That word is HURACÁN, the storm god of Cuba's Taino people, the indigenous civilization inhabiting the island when Columbus arrived in October 1492. Within a century of that arrival, the Taino had been nearly eradicated through disease, forced labor, and colonial violence. An entire civilization silenced. But the word survived.
The Spanish colonizers heard the Taino name for the storm and kept it. It passed into Spanish, then into English, then into every meteorology textbook on Earth, into international naming conventions for tropical cyclones, into the warning systems protecting millions of lives from the storms that Cuba's first people named. The Taino also gave the world tobacco, canoe, barbecue, and hammock. Not credited in the cultural record where their words live. Cuba's first civilization was silenced. It was not erased. So here is the question worth sitting with. When a people are removed from history, their land taken, their names lost, their stories buried, but their language remains inside, words spoken by billions who have no idea where those words came from, is that survival? Or is that the quietest form of erasure there is? A note on how we made this. This documentary drew from over 30 primary sources across 2019 to 2024, including UN agency reports, WHO data, and independent journalism from inside the island. The hardest task? Separating Cuban government statistics, frequently politically adjusted, from verifiable figures. We deliberately chose to present both the embargo's documented effects and the Cuban government's own governance failures, Because the story of Cuba's collapse cannot be told honestly if only one side is on the table. This documentary was researched and scripted with AI assistance.
All statistics were verified by our team against original sources. All editorial perspectives and framing choices are original decisions by real-life files. If you find an error, drop it in the comments. We read every one and we publish corrections. If this documentary changed how you see Cuba or the world, subscribe to Real Life Files. Every week, we go somewhere most channels won't. We don't just report what happened. We investigate why it matters to you. Real Life Files. Real people, real stories. The world unfiltered.